Can a pagan person worship the Norse pantheon and the Irish pantheon at the same time? Well, Dag de Eve agus Fáilte. Hi, hello, and welcome. John O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School here. And that is a question that we had over on the IPS TikTok. But I thought, though I answered it there, I might actually come here and just take a bit more time to expand on it a little bit further, because it's quite common, actually, that people would have experiences with more than one pantheon or have cross-pantheon relationships in their spiritual processes. So, to dive in with the traditional answer, neat answer, not hard to say. Yes, it's 100% possible to have a spiritual path that includes more than one pantheon. In fact, anyone who identifies as pagan, because pagan is not one particular form of religion, it's an umbrella term that kind of defines a number of different pathways of spirituality. But those defined as pagan all share four common traits, one of which is a belief in polytheism. So if you don't believe in polytheism, you're not practicing a pagan path. But if you do believe in polytheism, polytheism is literally the belief in multiple deities. And so if you're practicing polytheism with a belief in multiple deities, but you don't acknowledge the existence of other cultures' multiple deities, then you're doing it wrong. So, okay, in my opinion, you're doing it wrong. Because one of the core fundamental practices is that there is multiple deities, and those deities kind of grow and expand within the cultures in which they come from. And this is where we get a lot of confusion because the from our stats, from our perspective here at the Irish Pagan School, a deity cannot really be devoid from the culture in which it is expressed. And though there are similarities between certain similar cultures who have certain similar deities, doesn't mean they're the same deity. And part of the problem that we have seen in the past, as far back as Julius Caesar's fucking domination of Europe, is this need to force all deities or all expressions of divinity to conform to one ideal. Um, Julius Caesar literally wrote about it himself. He referred to this concept of a dispater, Dispater, which is a sky father. And according to his religious expression, his belief was that, oh, every kind of culture had a sky father, and all you had to do really was find out who that is in the other cultures, and then you can map how that fits, which is where we end up with such terrible kind of cross comparisons of the Dagda being the same as Odin, or the Dagda being the same as Thor, or Lu being the same as Apollo, or like Odin being the same as Zeus. You know, they're fundamentally different expressions of deity based on the culture that they come from. And so from us here, you can't really eradicate you. It doesn't make sense to separate a deity from the culture in which they grow and they express. Now, if you want to get into the psychology of stuff, you can go back to archetypal ideals. And through archetypal kind of understandings of the psychological construct of how our brains work, we can then draw comparatives, or we can say that this kind of fits this kind of fits that. But forcing that kind of archetypal basis to then define the deity, you're missing a trick as well, because the concept of archetype isn't to define things to the lowest common denominator so they make sense. It is to just allow you a framework for you to explore your own perceptions of things in a way that you can then delve deeper and build a better connection with. And that is how we teach it at the school. So to bring it back to our core topic and to avoid the psychology too much, um, yeah, we were asked, is it possible to have an expression of faith or spirituality or spiritual pathway practices of paganism with more than one pantheon? In this instance, Norse and Irish. And do they conflict? Which was the extra part of that question. So, yeah, absolutely. Really, what it comes down to at the end of the day, it is your own spiritual life. And as much as I'm a person in the internet, as much as I'm an educator in Irish mythology, spirituality, and culture, it's not for me to tell you how you're going to practice your spirituality in your own way. Now, I will go one step further and say it's also not for you to then define the core concepts of a deity or divinity that differ from the mythology or the culture in which they are expressed. So, anyone who's looking to explore a spiritual pathway in multiple directions between different pantheons has pretty much doubled their workload because the only way to do it honorably and ethically is to embrace the culture, embrace the mythology, learn the stories, get to know the information about that deity from its own cultural context. And through then, you then have a better idea of how to approach and how to interact with that expression of divinity. So pretty much you've signed up for double the work. One of the other things I have come across, and it frustrates me to a certain degree, is how certain individuals treat their spirituality or treat their divinities like they're a pick and mix. Like they get to have a bit of this, a bit of that, I'll take a bit of this and I'll take a bit of that. All of which is this concept of take, how the deity fulfills something for me and how I take from that relationship, as opposed to build a partnership or build a connection, which is what we teach at our school. I've been around people who are sharing their altar space with me, and again, they're entitled to do it the way they're going to do it. But they are like, oh, I put this on this altar for love, and that's Aphrodite. I'll put this on this altar for here, and that's, wisdom. I put this on this place over here, and that's for this. And they're literally just putting coins in a machine and expecting blessings to come out instead of building an actual dialogue, building a narrative of experience with an expression of divinity, which allows for a deeper kind of understanding of what that deity's agenda is, what their insights are, what their perspectives are, and how we then, as individuals in our world, can align that for ourselves with them and their cause. But again, you're going to do it your way. But what I would say is you need to be cautious and careful, because we have had people come to us in the school saying, oh, this has happened and this has gone wrong, and I don't know why this is happening in my life. And invariably, we take them through the process, ask a couple of questions. Well, how do you express your spirituality? When, where, what is your altar space like? How are you kind of communicating with deity? And it turns out that they have missed a step somewhere along the way, and they're not engaging as honorably or ethically as they could, or they're confusing or altering energies by just dumping it all into one place and expecting it to work. Because when we talk about altars, for example, an altar is a physical place where you go to engage in spiritual activity. The altar needs to work for you, but it also needs to work for the deities that you are communicating with. And so it's important to make sure that you are clear on what energy you're directing into what relationship. I joke about it like, polytheism, you may as well be engaging in polyamory, because you have to engage in multiple different relationships at different times with the same level of respect, honor, communication, and interaction if you're going to maintain that healthy level of connection with the expression of divinity you're looking to engage with. So, specifically down to the Norse and the Irish, there is no conflict really in the fundamentals of pursuing your relationship with those two pantheons. Ireland itself, like the first recorded invasion or arrival of Vikings into Ireland was in 800 Common Era. So thousands of years ago, we have records of Vikings coming into Ireland, and they didn't just come to raid and then fuck off. They came and they stayed. They used Ireland as a place to transport via whole different areas around Europe and beyond for their shipping and for their trade. So much so that places like Dublin and Waterford, Cork and Limerick, all of these places are built on rivers and for the main reason, and on the coast, because it suited the Vikings. They were Viking kingdoms initially, they were Viking settlements. And it didn't just arrive in 800 Common Era. We have records of them all the way through for 500 plus years being in Ireland, not just kind of coming and going, but establishing, being part of the place. And that's where we get to this concept of Hiberno-Norse, because there was an interaction between the cultures to such a degree that there was blending. Cultural blending is going to happen. It is normal. It's natural when you have people of different cultures sharing and engaging with openness and honesty and a respect for things. Now, of course, that doesn't mean there wasn't conflict. There absolutely straight up was conflict. We can look at that very clearly with the very famous Battle of Clontarf just outside of Dublin in the 1000s, 1060 or 1070, and that's the one that ended the dominance of Brian Boru, the very famous Irish king. but it was a conflict involving Viking warriors. So that didn't end Viking Ireland. They then carried on, they stayed, and Vikings did actually convert convert to Christianity, because we know from the records that that's the rise of dominance of Christianity is very much core within that medieval period. Although the first arrivals of Christianity can be traced back to 400 Common Era, when we have places like Skellig Vigil or Gurránbara, which are hermitages in remote places in Ireland. So the expression of spiritual pagan pathway involving both Norse and Irish culture and Irish deities is completely normal, makes a lot of sense. Talking about integrated ancestry, it's entirely possible that someone can trace their ancestry back to Scandinavia and to Ireland, and that's where you're going to have those interactions about pursuing a relationship with deity. But it is important to make sure that you're acknowledging the fact that you have to put the work in to acknowledge not just the expressions of the deity as you currently understand them, but understanding them deeper as they are known in their cultures, in their origins, where they actually come from, in the landscape that they come from, or the mythology that they come from, because that's the only way you'll be able to build a deeper connection. Now, I have explored Norse pantheons myself, and it was one thing that I was very confused about. Before I even knew the name Dagda, there was my awareness of his energy was around me, but I was not pursuing a pagan spirituality. I didn't define myself as pagan back then. I didn't even define myself as Christian, because I had fallen very much out of favor with the abuses performed by the Catholic Church on Ireland. And I was like, okay, well, I can understand some of the core concepts of like love one another, don't be an asshole, treat people like how you'd want to be treated. I'm down with that as part of a spiritual pathway. But I had gotten into a place of like acknowledging that there are multiple different pathways. I got copies of multiple different religious texts, some of which I shouldn't have had a copy of, but thank you very much for those who shared. So I could actually expand my perceptions and expand what I understood of as spirituality. And that's when I began to see that there was some other energy around me, and I thought it was Odin. I initially thought it was Odin. There was this particular form to the energy, but didn't the Odin didn't fit for me either. Especially when I went and read the mythology. I went and I bought as many books as I could. I went to the library. I read much about it, and the more I read about Odin, the less and less I knew this energy around me was him. Like the more I knew about Odin's mentality, his approach to things, the way he interacts, I then knew that this energy was Odin, so there was something else involved. And that's where it led to my belligerence about it, and the Dagda had to bother the Morrigan so the Morrigan would get her priest to say his name out loud in front of me, which is a whole other story. But in knowing the name, I then had something to identify the energy, and that allowed me to then understand and begin the next phase, which was learning everything I could from the culture, from the mythology, from the folklore about Dagda. And so that's what I'm talking about. It is embracing that level of energy and effort and work to make sure that you're honoring that connection and that relationship. I have since explored relationship and kind of question and interaction with the rest of the Tuatha De Danann, and I have unique experiences to me with other deities of the Tuatha De Danann. But the one that I have the strongest connection with, the one that I feel most in tune with, is the Dagda, and that's why I work for him. I am the Dagda Bard. And it's how I defined my relationship with him. No one turned around and said, "You're the Dagobard." Okay, no one in this world turned around and said that, but I was like exploring stories. I was trying to figure out my relationship with him through the mechanism story, because that's how I've always done it. And then one day he's like, "Well, you're my bard." And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, okay." And then I had to make a website. My partner was like, "Oh, these stories are great. You really should put them on a blog somewhere." And I was like, "I don't know how to do that." 5 minutes later, they're like, "There you go. Here you have a blog now. That's where you put your stories." And it became dagthebard.com. And I have become comfortable referring to myself as a bard because I am a storyteller. I share that information. I share that story so that people can understand the Dagda in the cultural context of his mythology, and also in a modern context of someone who's living and practicing pagan spirituality focused on a relationship with the Dagda. That is what I do. That is how I do it. Now, I've written stories about Odin. I have had there's one particular story, it's called The Ninth Wave, where I was wondering how Odin and the Dagda would interact, and it was on my mind for a while. So I did the thing that I do best, which is sit down and figure it out in story. And in the story, I wrote about Odin coming into Ireland for the first time and meeting the Dagda right there on the coast. And it was entertaining for me to explore that based on what I knew about both of those deities and how they would interact. So if you're interested, you can find that on dagdabard.com if you want to read that story. But to bring it back to this particular person, the question is about how a relationship can work with cross-pantheon processes and whether there would be conflict. So it does come down to knowing the information to help you define and understand what you mean by conflict and whether or not there is some underlying shifts in energy that are required to maintain space for those relationships independent of each other. I'm not going to say that you can't put, Freya and, Bridget stuff on the same altar space. I'm not going to say you can't put Dagda and Odin in the same space. I'm not going to tell you to avoid putting Loki and Monan and McLear in the same place. I think that'd be fucking hilarious. And part of me is actually, I said that in the TikTok video when I responded. And since then, part of my brain is like, Monan and Loki, what would that conversation be like? And the only way I know I'm going to be able to deal with that is to write the fucking story. So we'll see if that occurs in the future because it's still ruminating. But it is about understanding the nature of divinity as expressed within the culture of the cultural context. And I know I'm saying the same thing, but it is crucially important to do that so that you can then honorably and honestly approach that connection of relationship for yourself and for the deity. Because if you treat a deity like a pick and mix, putting prayers and get out offerings or get out blessings, it might work, but you're doing yourself a disservice by not exploring the possibility of deeper connection, deeper understanding. And that's all we teach at the Irish Pagan School. All of our classes about here's the information, and we have been accused of being academic, but part of it is to make sure you have the grounding in the academia, you have the grounding in the original lore, in the core stories that define these deities within the culture that they come from. That means that as you grow in your relationship, as you begin to kind of develop things for yourself, as you begin to explore your relationship in the Irish other world, in guided meditation, in offerings, practices, altar work, whatever it actually is, you're doing it with the right framework. You're doing it with the right structures so that you're not going to be confused. You're not going to be misconstrued. You're not going to be led astray by something pretending to be deity when it's not, because that can happen. Or, we get so caught up in our own imagination or our creativity, in our own kind of concepts, we're not able to clearly discern when it's our own make believe and when it's actually our unconscious mind speaking to through our subconscious into our mindscape from deity. And those things are very markedly different experiences. So it's a great question. It really is. I answered it in brief over in the TikTok. Again, if you're not over in TikTok, all you gotta do is go over there and search Irish Pagan School. You'll see this mug, and I try and respond to questions over there as best I can. And here, I still like to turn up and take that bit more time. Point at the resources, show you where the information is, and get into things a little bit deeper, a little bit chunkier. So if you haven't subscribed to the TikTok, do it. If you haven't subscribed here and you're inclined to carry on, please feel free to do so. If you're looking to know more, go to the Irish Pagan School. And even if you can't afford a class with us, we have over a year's worth of free resources available for you. irishpagan.school/free. Boom. Years worth of free resources. From classes, meditations to like book recommendations, something you could tip away at to explore your own relationship. It's there. You want to know about ancestry? All you got to do is go to irishpagan.school/roots. And there's a workbook there for filling in and exploring your connection and exploring the concept of how your ancestry comes and should inform your relationship with yourself and with your spirituality. If you want to get into some kind of practical process, you want to actually take it deeper in what is paganism, fundamentals, irishpagan.school/3 days. And you can get 3 days worth of information emailed directly to you, something to do each day to understand and build fundamental foundational stuff around your spirituality. All of this we do to try and avoid misinformation, to try and help people establish a protocol of self exploration, self discovery for their spirituality so that they can do it from an educated point of view, so that they can do it from an honest, deep point of view and avoid casual, shallow interactions with themselves or with deity. Anyway, thank you very much for asking the question. I do appreciate it. Hopefully, some of this has been interesting or curiously inspiring for you. If you have any questions, throw them in the comments. I'm always happy to come back and do my best to answer them. If you aren't subscribed, do make sure you follow up and connect with the information. We do this all the time because it is a joy, but it's also part of the calling to get real information out there. It's protocol. It's mandatory 101 stuff according to the God that I work for and the God my partner works for too. So thank you very much for being here. Look after yourself. Until the next time, Slán. Goodbye.